The sky darkens. It happened without warning. One moment, the sky was a clear, brilliant blue over New York City, the usual hum of city life filling the air. The next, it was dark, unnaturally dark. The sun was blotted out, and an enormous shadow swept across the ground. People stopped in their tracks, eyes turning upward as a massive ship, unlike anything they had ever seen, hung in the sky. Its surface was dark and metallic, reflecting the city's lights in a cold, menacing way. In every corner of the earth, the same image appeared on every screen. The symbol of the Galactic Council, a symbol of alien power, now casting a pall over humanity. The message that followed was simple but terrifying. The Galactic Council demands your attention. The transmission cut to a towering hologram, projected above the United Nations building in New York. The figure that appeared was not human. Its skin was a pale shade of green, stretched tightly over angular bones, and its eyes glowed an unsettling orange. The alien, High Counselor Vorik, spoke with a tone that seemed to carry centuries of authority, as though his voice itself held the weight of an entire universe. "People of Earth," Vorik began, his voice crisp and commanding, "you have been chosen to join the Galactic Council's resource acquisition program. In return for your continued existence, you will provide 10,000 of your finest specimens to serve our mining efforts." The words struck the crowd like a thunderclap. The hologram paused, its gaze sweeping over the world leaders who were gathered in the UN assembly. Vorik's eyes narrowed, the calm before the storm. "You have 30 Earth days to comply," he said coldly. "Failure to provide the required tribute will result in the immediate destruction of your cities. Choose wisely." The message ended. The hologram flickered out, leaving behind a stunned silence. It took several moments before anyone in the room dared to speak. The representatives of Earth's nations sat in shock, unable to process what had just happened. There were murmurs of fear, outrage, and confusion, but no clear course of action. Humanity, in its vast diversity, now faced the gravest challenge it had ever known. There was no question of fighting the invaders. Earth's weapons were nothing compared to the ships in orbit. To refuse would be certain death, but to comply meant sending 10,000 innocent people to an unknown, likely horrific fate. At the back of the room, Thomas Reed, the head administrator of the North American prison system, watched the proceedings with growing discomfort. As the leaders argued, his mind raced. Reed had never expected to be part of this meeting. He was here only as a side note, a voice in a room full of high-ranking diplomats and military leaders. Yet, as the chaos of the debate unfolded, a single thought began to form. What if Earth could offer something they never expected? Reed's eyes narrowed as the idea solidified. It was risky, and it might not work, but it was the only plan that offered a glimmer of hope. As the voices in the room rose louder, he stood up and made his way to the front, his footsteps echoing in the tense silence. "Mr. President," Reed began, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable determination, "I believe I have a solution." The room fell silent as every eye turned to him. Reed continued, his words cutting through the noise. "The Council wants 10,000 of our finest specimens," he said, "but they never defined what finest means. What if we gave them our most dangerous?" A ripple of confusion spread through the room. The British representative leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "You want to send criminals?" Reed nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, we have over 2 million prisoners in North American facilities alone. Many of them are former military, brilliant strategists, survivors. They might be locked up, but they're far from weak. In fact, they might just be exactly what the Council needs." The murmurs grew louder. Reed could hear the objections rising, but he pressed on. "These prisoners are adaptable," he said. "They've survived on the fringes of society. They know how to survive in hostile environments. And most importantly, they're expendable. If something goes wrong, we have plausible deniability. The Council won't understand human society well enough to spot the deception. They'll think they're receiving our best people, but in truth, we'll be sending them those who have nothing left to lose." The room fell silent once again. The President of the United States looked thoughtful, considering Reed's proposal. For a moment, it seemed as though the weight of the situation had brought everyone to the same conclusion. This was their only option. "But will they agree to this?" the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom asked, his voice skeptical. Reed smiled. Reduced sentences, the promise of a chance to make a real difference, and the possibility of showing the Council just how resilient humans really are. They'll be lining up for the opportunity. The President looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each representative. One by one, they nodded in agreement. The plan had its risks, but it was the only viable option. "Do it," the President finally said, his voice firm. "But keep it quiet. We only have 30 days to pull this off." As Reed left the UN building that evening, he looked up at the alien ship still hovering in the darkening sky. The Galactic Council thought they were getting Earth's finest specimens, but they were about to learn something much different. Humanity's true strength wasn't in its brightest minds or strongest soldiers. It was in its survivors, the ones who had been through hell and still kept going. The real game was just beginning. The volunteers of the forgotten. As the sun began to set over New York City, Thomas Reed found himself at the forefront of an operation that could change the course of human history. The shock of the previous day's events still lingered in the air, but now there was no time to waste. The world had 30 days to meet the Galactic Council's demands, and Reed had a plan, a dangerous, unconventional plan. But it was humanity's only chance. He stood in his office at the North American Prison Administration headquarters, staring at a long list of names scrolling across his screen. These weren't the names of scientists, engineers, or soldiers. They were the names of the forgotten ones, the criminals, the outcasts, the ones who had been cast aside by society. But Reed knew that beneath their criminal records lay a potential unlike anything the Galactic Council could anticipate. He had spent the night drafting a list of prisoners who could fit the bill, men and women who had the skills, the resilience, and the ruthlessness to take on whatever the alien race might throw their way. Some had military backgrounds, others were former hackers or engineers, while a few were master tacticians who had been locked up for their involvement in organized crime. All had one thing in common. They were survivors, people who had faced the darkest parts of humanity and come out on top. Reed hit a button, sending the list to the President's office. He then called a secret meeting with the heads of various intelligence agencies and military leaders, knowing that this operation would need the full support of the world's governments. He couldn't do it alone. This wasn't just about offering prisoners in exchange for Earth's survival. This was about humanity's ability to adapt, to turn the tables, and to use its unique strengths to its advantage. As Reed walked into the meeting room the next morning, the room fell silent. World leaders from across the globe were present, each with a different agenda, but all united in their fear of the alien invaders. The President stood, gesturing for Reed to take the floor. "We've reviewed your proposal," the President said, his voice grave. "It's unorthodox, but it may be our only option. Tell us what you need from us." Reed nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He took a deep breath before beginning. "First, we need to ensure that these prisoners are ready. We'll offer them the chance to volunteer, reduced sentences, a chance to redeem themselves, and the opportunity to take down the very beings who would enslave humanity." A murmur of disbelief passed through the room. Some were skeptical, others horrified. After all, these were criminals, some of the worst in society. Could they really be trusted to fight for humanity's survival? Could they really be counted on to handle an alien invasion? "We'll have to sell this to them," Reed continued. "These prisoners are survivors. They've lived through hell and made it out. They know how to fight when there's nothing left to lose." The CIA director spoke up. "How do you intend to handle their loyalty? These people are criminals. How do we ensure they won't turn on us once they're in space?" Reed was prepared for this question. "We'll keep a close watch on them. Their sentence reduction will be contingent upon their performance. But I believe that the idea of taking down the Galactic Council, of sticking it to these aliens who think they can control us, well, that's a powerful motivator. The president rubbed his temples, clearly conflicted. But what if they fail? What if they betray us? Reed looked each leader in the eye. The alternative is worse. If we don't act, if we don't comply with the Council's demands, they'll destroy our cities. We have no choice but to trust in the one thing that has always made humanity great: our ability to survive, to adapt, and to outsmart our enemies. After several long minutes, the room fell into a tense silence. The stakes were too high to back down now. Finally, the president nodded. "We're in. But you have 30 days, Reed. Make sure you're ready." With that, the meeting ended, but Reed knew the real work was just beginning. Over the next few days, Reed worked tirelessly, coordinating with military and intelligence agencies, drafting plans, and recruiting the right people for the task. The prisoners who would form the core of this mission were carefully selected. They had to be capable of understanding the scale of the challenge they faced: an invasion by a galactic empire that considered them nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Each prisoner was approached with an offer they couldn't refuse: freedom in exchange for service. No one was forced. They were given a choice, and for many, it was the first time in years they had been given any kind of agency. James Miller, a former Special Forces operative, had been serving a 20-year sentence for a violent robbery gone wrong. He was one of the first to volunteer. His military training made him an ideal candidate for the mission, but it was his resilience, his deep hatred for those who oppressed humanity, that made him a leader among the prisoners. Miller met with Reed in a small, secure room within the prison facility. "You're asking me to lead a group of criminals into space to fight aliens," he said, his tone skeptical. "What's the catch?" Reed smiled grimly. "The catch is that you don't get to leave until the job is done. But if we succeed, you'll walk away with a clean slate." Miller leaned back in his chair, considering the offer. "And if we fail? Then Earth will be destroyed, and none of us will be around to care." Miller nodded slowly. He had always lived his life on the edge, but this was different. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced. "I'm in," he said finally, extending his hand. "Let's show these aliens what humanity's made of." Reed shook his hand firmly. He had just secured the first of many volunteers, but he knew the hard work was far from over. They had 30 days to turn a ragtag group of prisoners into soldiers capable of taking on the might of the Galactic Council. But Reed believed in one thing above all else: humanity's ability to adapt and fight back against the impossible. And now it was time for the prisoners to prove just how far that belief would take them. The unlikely warriors. As the days ticked by, Reed's operation moved forward at an unprecedented pace. The prisoners who had agreed to join the mission were sent to a highly classified training facility deep in the heart of the Nevada desert. What had once been a sprawling, desolate stretch of land was now transformed into a high-tech military base. Its very existence was a secret, one that only a handful of people on Earth knew about. The prisoners were transported in groups, each escorted by armed guards. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, uncertainty, and an air of defiance. They were criminals, yes, but now they had a purpose, something that no one had given them for years. The opportunity to fight back against an alien force that threatened to erase their entire planet. James Miller was the first to arrive. The former Special Forces operative stood tall as he stepped off the transport, his boots crunching against the dry earth. Despite the scars from his past, his eyes were sharp, scanning his surroundings with the same intensity that had kept him alive through the years of military service. He wasn't here to play by anyone's rules. He was here to survive, and to make sure the human race had a fighting chance. Inside the base, the prisoners were met by a team of seasoned military instructors, led by Colonel Sarah Ward. Colonel Ward had served in various covert operations around the world, and her reputation was as tough as her training. When Reed had asked her to lead this unconventional mission, she hadn't hesitated. She understood the magnitude of what was at stake. Humanity had to fight for its survival, and if that meant training a ragtag group of outcasts to do the unthinkable, so be it. "I don't care who you were before," Colonel Ward said, addressing the group of prisoners. "Out there, you're all the same. You're all soldiers now, whether you like it or not. And your job is simple: survive, adapt, and strike back when the time comes. If you can't handle that, you won't make it past the first mission." The prisoners exchanged glances. Some sneered at her words, their pride too wounded by their pasts to accept such a direct challenge. Others were more receptive, eager for a chance to prove themselves. Miller stood at the front, his eyes focused on Ward. He wasn't intimidated, not by her or by the situation. He had led men into battle before, and he could do it again. What worried him was the rest of the group: the former drug lords, the cybercriminals, the petty thieves. None of them had ever been in the kind of life-or-death situation that he had faced. Their survival would depend on more than just physical training. They needed to be hardened, unified, and motivated. Over the next few days, the group was put through a grueling regimen. Physical training was only the beginning. They were taught how to handle advanced weaponry, including alien tech weapons they had never seen before. Some of the technology was still in its early stages of understanding, but Reed's team had been working closely with a few alien defectors who had provided crucial intel on the Council's weaponry. But the real challenge wasn't in the physical training. It was in the mental conditioning. The prisoners had been living on the edge for years, each of them battling their own demons. Now they had to work as a team. They had to trust each other, even when it seemed like their world was falling apart. Colonel Ward often found herself at odds with certain prisoners. Like Marco Diaz, a former cartel enforcer whose only interest was in protecting himself. He was strong, no doubt, but his loyalty was suspect. Then there was Evelyn Hayes, a brilliant hacker who had been serving a sentence for a high-profile corporate crime. She was quick-witted and resourceful, but she had no experience with combat. It was hard to imagine her in the middle of a firefight. Yet Ward could sense her intelligence could be useful in ways that couldn't be trained. Miller quickly took charge, though. His military experience made him the natural leader of the group. He helped whip them into shape, running drills, teaching them the importance of strategy and teamwork. But there were moments when even Miller doubted the success of the mission. There were simply too many unknowns. How would these criminals adapt to space combat? Would they have the discipline to follow through on the mission when faced with the alien enemy? Late one night, as the base was quiet and still, Reed sat in his office, reviewing data from the training simulations. He knew they were pushing the prisoners hard, too hard in some cases, but time was running out. The Galactic Council would arrive in less than 2 weeks. His phone rang, breaking his concentration. It was Colonel Ward. "Reed, you need to see this," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Reed grabbed his jacket and headed straight to the simulation room, his mind racing with possibilities. What could have happened now? Were the prisoners fighting among themselves? Or was something more serious happening? When he arrived, Ward was already standing by the simulation console, her arms crossed. Miller stood next to her, his expression unreadable. "We ran a test exercise," Ward explained. "It's supposed to be a simple infiltration mission, a mock attack on an alien ship, but we let the prisoners run it with minimal supervision. And, well, take a look." Reed's eyes focused on the screen. The simulation was running smoothly at first, the prisoners moving through the simulated corridors of an alien vessel. But as the scenario progressed, something unexpected happened. The prisoners, under Miller's leadership, began to work together in ways that Reed hadn't anticipated. They adapted to the changing environment. They utilized the alien weapons with surprising skill, and most shockingly, they began to anticipate the simulated alien defenses, outsmarting them with tactics no one had expected. Reed turned to Miller. "What's going on?" Miller gave him a small, grim smile. "They're learning. They're adapting. They may have been criminals once, but they're soldiers now, and they're ready to fight. Reed felt a surge of hope. For the first time in weeks, he believed they might just have a fighting chance. The prisoners had become something more than what they once were. They had transformed into a force of nature, driven by the same survival instincts that had kept them alive through years of hardship. Now they had the chance to put those instincts to work against an enemy that far outweighed them in technology and power. As the countdown to the Galactic Council's arrival continued, Reed knew that this unlikely band of warriors might be humanity's only hope. Their time had come, and they were ready to rise above their pasts, to fight for the future of Earth. Into the abyss. The days that followed were a blur of intense preparation, but as the final countdown drew near, the pressure weighed heavier than ever. The prisoners had become a formidable force under Miller's leadership, but the real test was about to begin. They weren't just going to face alien technology. They were about to face the unknown. Outer space. The vast, unforgiving expanse beyond their home planet. There, every misstep could be deadly. Thomas Reed stood on the observation deck of the training facility, looking out over the launch pads where the makeshift fleet was being prepared. It wasn't much compared to the alien warships, but it had to be enough. His team had been working tirelessly to modify old military shuttles, retrofitting them with a combination of human and alien technology. It was a gamble, and every decision was made with the hope that it would be enough to give the prisoners a fighting chance. Miller approached him, his face stoic, but Reed could see the tension in his eyes. "We're ready," Miller said, his voice low. "At least as ready as we'll ever be. But these prisoners, they're not soldiers. Some of them are terrified, and they've never seen space before." Reed nodded. He knew the stakes better than anyone. The prisoners had come a long way, but space combat was a different beast altogether. The silence, the weightlessness, the isolation. It would test them in ways they couldn't even imagine. They'll adapt. They've already proven they can, but we need to keep them focused. The mission is everything now. If we succeed, we have a chance to strike back. If we fail, humanity is gone. "Understood," Miller replied. "But there's something else you should know." He paused, as if debating whether to continue. "There's a risk. The Council might be more prepared than we realize. We've trained them to fight, but if we go up there unprepared, it's not just a loss for Earth. It's a loss for every person on this planet. The pressure's on." Reed exhaled, watching as the workers finalized the shuttle preparations. The weight of it all sank in. They weren't just sending prisoners into space. They were sending humanity's last hope. As Reed and Miller continued their conversation, Colonel Ward entered the room, her face tight with concern. "We've been getting reports," she began. "It looks like the Council is moving ahead of schedule. The ships are positioning themselves in the outer system. We might not have 30 days after all." Reed's heart sank. The urgency was clear, but it wasn't just about speed. It was about the scale of the challenge. The Galactic Council's warships could decimate Earth's defenses in an instant. They weren't just interested in Earth's resources. They were here to ensure compliance, to make an example out of humanity. "We can't afford to wait any longer," Reed said firmly. "Miller, prep the teams. We launch tonight. It's now or never." As the decision was made, the atmosphere on the base shifted. The prisoners who had trained so hard now found themselves preparing for a mission that no one had ever imagined. They weren't just facing enemy soldiers. They were facing an alien empire. They weren't warriors. They were fugitives, thieves, and murderers turned into something more. The fear and doubt had to be buried deep inside them. They had no other choice. Miller took charge immediately. The prisoners were given their final briefings, the gravity of the mission settling in with each passing moment. Despite their previous training, there was no training for what lay beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Some of them, like Evelyn Hayes, had never even been on an airplane, let alone a spacecraft. As they suited up, the prisoners were lined up in front of the hangar, awaiting their shuttle assignments. Miller did a quick scan of the group, checking the faces of his new soldiers. Some were shaking with nerves. Others, like Marco Diaz, seemed oddly calm, their eyes cold and distant, hiding whatever emotions they might have been feeling. "Listen up," Miller shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is it. No one's going back until we've completed the mission. We're taking the fight to them, and we're going to win. Whatever happens, remember, this is our chance to take back control. You're here because you're the ones who can make it happen. Now let's get to work." For a brief moment, there was no sound, just a collection of faces reflecting a mix of uncertainty and determination. Then, one by one, the prisoners nodded. There would be no turning back. The shuttle engines hummed to life, the first group of prisoners boarding. The cold, sterile metal walls of the spacecraft felt like a claustrophobic reminder of what they were about to face. As the last prisoner secured their harness, Miller took his seat, his eyes scanning the room, noting how each of them handled the situation. Some seemed resigned to their fate, while others were trying to mask their fear with bravado. Evelyn, the hacker, sat quietly in her seat, her eyes darting around as she absorbed everything around her. She wasn't just here for herself. She was here for humanity, for something bigger than her past. Ready to launch. The technician's voice crackled over the comms, initiating takeoff sequence. The ground beneath them trembled as the shuttle was lifted into the air, the vastness of the sky opening up before them. As they soared higher, leaving Earth behind, Reed watched from the control center, feeling a sense of disbelief wash over him. This wasn't just a mission. This was humanity's last stand. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere, entering the emptiness of space. There was no sound, no sensation other than the hum of the engines and the steady pulse of adrenaline in their veins. Space was terrifyingly silent, as if mocking the very notion that anything as fragile as a human could survive here. Miller stood, glancing at the others. "Buckle up. We're heading straight into enemy territory. Stay sharp." Outside the window, the stars appeared far too close, and the vastness of space felt infinitely more daunting. But beyond that expanse lay their target, the flagship of the Galactic Council, their first step into the unknown. The mission had officially begun. As the shuttle descended toward its target, the prisoners knew this was more than a fight for survival. It was a fight for humanity itself. And though they had been criminals once, they were now soldiers with one common cause: to prove that no one, not even a powerful alien empire, could ever break the spirit of humanity. The first strike. The cold expanse of space was everything the prisoners had feared, and more. It was vast, suffocating, and silent, a backdrop to the swirling mass of unknowns that lay before them. As their shuttles glided towards the heart of the Galactic Council's fleet, the reality of the situation set in. No longer were they simply fugitives or prisoners. They were humanity's last hope, thrust into an impossible war that could either make or break their existence. James Miller stood at the helm of his shuttle, his hand steady on the controls, but his mind racing. He knew the odds: a handful of poorly equipped humans against an empire that spanned galaxies. But the prisoners, the men and women who had once been criminals, had become something more in the weeks since their transformation. They had become survivors, warriors, and now they had to prove it. 5 minutes to target, came the voice of Sergeant Liu, one of the few non-prisoner members of the crew. She was a seasoned combat veteran who had volunteered for the mission, knowing full well the risks involved. Everyone prepare for engagement. Miller glanced back at his team. Each face was a mix of anxiety, fear, and something else: determination. They were about to do the impossible: infiltrate the flagship of the Galactic Council, steal critical intelligence, and return to Earth with the information that could save their planet. Simple, right? The shuttle's interior lights flickered as the ship passed through the debris field surrounding the Council's fleet. The massive, ominous shapes of the alien warships loomed in the distance, each one a testament to the power of an empire that had long since conquered countless worlds. The sight of their advanced weaponry sent a chill through the group. But in the faces of the prisoners, there was no turning back now. The time for hesitation was over. "We've got a visual on the flagship," Miller said, his voice calm. "Stay focused. Remember the plan. We get in, get what we need, and get out. No heroics. This is our first strike. We make it count." As they closed in on their target, Reed's voice crackled over the comms. "Miller, you're clear to proceed. We're monitoring you from the base. Keep us posted." Miller nodded, turning back to his team. This was it, the moment of truth. The shuttle's hull groaned as it entered the outer perimeter of the enemy ship, cloaked in the shadow of the massive warship's enormity. The prisoners had trained for this. They'd studied the enemy's tactics, learned about their defenses, and prepared for every contingency. Yet no amount of preparation could account for the stark terror of what they were about to face. They approached the side of the flagship, a complex web of shields and energy barriers flashing in the darkness. The mission was simple on paper: breach the defenses, infiltrate the command center, and extract intelligence on the Galactic Council's plans. But the reality was far more dangerous. If they were discovered, their entire existence would be wiped from history. The shuttle's external systems hummed with activity as Lou worked the controls, expertly guiding them toward a narrow gap between two alien destroyers. The ship lurched as they passed through, cloaked under the cover of space debris and the dark silence of the universe. "Shields are holding steady," Lou reported. "We're almost through the breach point. Keep your heads down." Reed's voice came through again, much more urgent this time. "Miller, we're picking up a strange energy signature from the flagship. We think they've detected you. Get in and out fast. The clock's ticking." Miller's pulse quickened. "Understood. Lock down the hatch and prepare to board. We move quickly. Stay sharp, everyone." The shuttle shuddered as it docked with the flagship, the sound of the clamps securing it vibrating through the hull. For a moment, there was no sound, just the eerie silence of space, broken only by the sound of their breathing. The prisoners had no way of knowing what lay ahead, but they all knew one thing: there was no turning back now. The hatch opened, and Miller was the first to step out. The cold, metallic air of the flagship hit him immediately, and he could feel the subtle vibrations beneath his boots as the massive ship hummed with energy. The others followed quickly, their weapons ready, their faces grim. "Stay close," Miller ordered, leading the way through the dark corridors of the enemy vessel. The hallways were stark and sterile, a far cry from the cramped, chaotic prison cells they had once called home. There was a stillness to the ship, an unnatural quiet that only made it more intimidating. They had no idea what they were up against. The Galactic Council's forces were far superior in both technology and numbers, but the prisoners had one advantage: the element of surprise, and for the first time in their lives, they knew what it was like to have something worth fighting for. Earth, their planet, their people. "Move out," Miller shouted, breaking the silence. "We need to find the Central Command and extract the intel. We don't have much time before they realize we're here." They moved quickly, using the training they had been drilled on for weeks. The corridors of the flagship were empty, too empty. But the prisoners knew that alien soldiers could be hiding around any corner. They had to stay sharp. As they turned a corner, a loud crack echoed through the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots marching in unison. Miller signaled for the group to stop. A patrol of alien soldiers was heading straight for them, their long, spindly limbs moving with unnatural speed. There was no way to avoid them. Miller motioned for Evelyn, the hacker, to take the lead. She nodded and pulled out a small device she had been working on during their training. It was an experimental piece of tech, a cross between human ingenuity and captured alien technology. Evelyn had been the one to modify it, knowing it could be their only chance to disable the aliens' weapons long enough to escape. She pressed a button, and a pulse of energy surged down the corridor, striking the aliens' weapons and short-circuiting them. The soldiers froze, confused by the sudden malfunction, giving the prisoners just enough time to close the distance and take them out silently. "That's how it's done," Miller muttered, his voice low. "Let's keep moving." The team continued their mission, heartbeats pounding in their ears as they navigated the enemy ship. The closer they got to the central command, the more intense the pressure became. They knew the moment they got the intel, the alien forces would be on their tail. But it was the only way to give humanity a fighting chance. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and the prisoners, once discarded by society, were now humanity's last hope. The first strike had been made, but the war was far from over. The heart of the beast, the flagship of the Galactic Council, loomed before them, an enormous fortress of gleaming metal and strange alien alloys. Every step felt like a small victory, but Miller knew the hardest part was still ahead. With the intel they had secured from the disabled alien soldiers, they were closer than ever to the heart of the ship, the central command where the real answers lay. The fate of Earth rested in their hands now. There was no room for error. The team had already fought their way through several corridors, each one more dangerous than the last. Alien technology was scattered everywhere, and the deeper they went, the more advanced the ship's systems became. Every room they passed held potential traps, sensors, or other advanced defenses that could detect their presence. Yet, despite all the obstacles, they pressed forward. They had no choice. The alien fleet was closing in on Earth, and they needed to learn everything about the Council's plans before it was too late. Miller led the way, his senses sharp as he navigated through the winding passages. His mind wasn't just focused on the mission, it was on the prisoners. Many of them had only recently been pulled out of the depths of their crimes, yet here they were, proving they could be something more, something better. Evelyn Hayes, who had once been known for her hacking skills, was now functioning as their tech expert. She had rigged several alien devices to scan the ship's systems and unlock the information they needed. It was a risky operation, but she had shown an ability to understand and manipulate alien technology faster than Reed had ever anticipated. The woman who had once been a corporate criminal was now a key player in a mission that could change the course of history. As they reached a large, heavily secured door, Miller motioned for the team to stop. The door in front of them pulsed with energy, an array of symbols shifting across its surface. This was it, the Central Command. Beyond it lay the heart of the alien invasion plans. Reed's voice crackled through their comms, his voice tight with urgency. "Miller, be advised. The Council has likely detected your presence. You have limited time before reinforcements arrive. Get that intel and get out fast. If they figure out what you're after, Earth's survival may depend on how quickly you can get back." Miller's grip on his weapon tightened, but he remained calm. "Understood. Hayes, you're up." Evelyn stepped forward, her fingers working quickly over the alien device she had crafted. With a deep breath, she pressed a series of buttons, and the door before them hissed open. The dim glow from the corridor beyond spilled into the hallway, casting long shadows across their faces. Every instinct in Miller's body told him to move quickly, but he also knew that any mistake here would mean certain death. Inside, the command center was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was vast, filled with glowing alien consoles, a web of shifting light, and complex patterns that seemed to pulse with life. The walls were lined with technology so advanced that even Reed's most cutting-edge efforts had nothing comparable. The very air seemed to hum with the power of the ship, a nerve center for the fleet that would destroy humanity if given the chance. But Miller wasn't there to admire the design. He was there for answers. "Get to work, Hayes," he ordered. "We need to know everything. What's the Council's plan for Earth? How do we stop them?" Evelyn quickly moved to one of the consoles, her eyes scanning the alien interface. She could feel the rush of adrenaline pumping through her veins, but she stayed focused. Despite the alien nature of the systems, she had learned to navigate them with precision. It wasn't easy, and the tech had its own language, one she had to decipher on the fly. But Evelyn was used to cracking difficult problems. Her fingers flew over the controls, and after a tense moment, a map of the galaxy appeared on the screen, with Earth marked at its center. "It's a resource acquisition mission," Evelyn said, her voice steady but grim. "They've been mining other planets, taking resources, and using them to power their fleet. Earth's resources are next: energy, metals, minerals. But it's more than that. They're planning to use Earth as a staging ground for a much larger conquest. If they succeed here, they'll have the power to wipe out resistance across the galaxy." The weight of her words hung in the air. Miller's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of it all. Earth wasn't just a resource to the Galactic Council. They were planning to use it as a base to spread their empire. "We need to shut down their operations," Miller said, looking at the map. "How do we stop them?" Evelyn tapped a few more keys, bringing up the Council's energy core schematic. If we can destroy their main energy core, it'll cripple their fleet. The entire operation is powered by this one source. If it goes down, they lose everything." Miller's eyes narrowed. "Where is it?" She pointed to a glowing spot on the map, deep in the belly of the ship. "Right here. But it's heavily guarded. We'll have to fight our way through their most advanced defense systems." Miller exchanged glances with the others. There was no hesitation now. The prisoners had come too far, learned too much, to turn back. The fight had to be taken to the heart of the alien empire. And this was their chance. "We do it," Miller said, his voice unwavering. "We hit them where it hurts. We take out their energy core and cripple their fleet. No more waiting." The team nodded in agreement, their fear now channeled into purpose. They had come for information, but now they had something more: a weapon, a way to stop the alien threat before it could destroy everything they knew. But as they turned to make their way deeper into the ship, the doors to the command center slammed shut with a deafening sound. A series of alarms blared through the halls. The Galactic Council had realized what was happening. They were no longer dealing with human weakness. They were dealing with a threat. And they weren't going to take it lying down. "Move out," Miller ordered, his voice sharp. "We're not done yet. We've got a planet to save." The final battle for Earth had begun.